Aquí te canta LuisAnthony.
And we'll start with you, Congressman Pierluisi, and go from there. Is that okay?
Yes, thank you. Chairman Hatch, Ranking Member Wyden, and members of the committee. The crisis in Puerto Rico is not new. The 3.5 million U.S. citizens I represent have endured it for many years. Based on any metric, Puerto Rico's economy has lagged behind the states for decades. The Puerto Rico government spends more than it receives, leading to deficits and debt. My constituents are becoming your constituents in unprecedented numbers. Between 2004 and 2014, Puerto Rico's population declined by over 7%. The exodus is changing the character of Puerto Rico and the composition of the American electorate. To tackle the crisis, we must act with boldness and vision. If we're faint-hearted, we will fail. The core economic problem is lack of growth. So Puerto Rico must implement a strategy to increase capital investment. Government reform is essential. Puerto Rico has an inefficient central government whose competence and credibility are questioned by prospective investors. The government has stifled, rather than unleashed, the private sector's potential. Fiscal reform is also required. The Puerto Rico government must live within its means and cut spending. It must modernize its tax system, which requires some companies to pay 39% and others to pay under 5%. Recently, the government increased taxes to support its excess spending. These taxes must be repealed or refashioned. Once Puerto Rico has an equitable tax policy, the government must collect what it imposes, something it now does poorly. Furthermore, the Puerto Rico government must ensure access to affordable electricity, a modern transportation system, and other basic infrastructure. Many of these services are provided by public corporations that are in financial distress, carry significant debt, and require reform. The governor of Puerto Rico has asserted that if Puerto Rico continues on its present course, its $71 billion debt is unpayable. But this course can and must change. With sound economic and fiscal policies, the debt will become easier to manage. Puerto Rico's constitution provides that debt service on bonds issued or guaranteed by the central government take priority over other expenditures. These bonds must be paid, period. There are 18 government entities in Puerto Rico that issue bonds. Each is in a different financial condition and has different legal terms governing its bonds. Contrary to the governor's strategy, each should be considered on a case-by-case basis. Finally, the governor has portrayed the debate about whether Puerto Rico will meet its obligations to creditors as us versus them. The countless men and women from Puerto Rico who own our bonds know better. Like the people of Puerto Rico, Congress is right to expect more from the government of Puerto Rico. But it would be the height of hypocrisy for this committee to criticize Puerto Rico without acknowledging the federal government's shared responsibility for this crisis. The crisis is rooted in Puerto Rico's undemocratic and undignified territory status. Congress treats Puerto Rico in discriminatory fashion under numerous programs within this committee's jurisdiction. My Senate allies and I have filed bills to address these disparities, and the committee should act on them. Otherwise, spare us the lectures about Puerto Rico's own failings. This is not just a Puerto Rico problem. It is an American problem, requiring an American solution. If you treat us like second-class citizens, don't expect us to have a first-class economy. If you treat us in appalling fashion under Medicaid and Medicare, don't claim surprise that our healthcare system is in dire condition. If you exclude us from tax credits that encourage individuals to work, don't add insult to injury by attributing our low labor participation rate to generous welfare benefits or urging our exemption from the minimum wage. If you don't extend the SSI program to Puerto Rico and you treat us unequally under TANF, don't express disbelief that 1 in 4 Puerto Rico residents lives in extreme poverty. I look forward to the day when my constituents have the exact same rights and responsibilities as your constituents. For Puerto Rico to prosper, it must be treated equally. And to be treated equally, it must become a state. Until then, there is much this committee can do to empower Puerto Rico. I urge you to act. Thank you.
And let's just go right down the row. Congressman, very glad to have you here. Watched your very fine work in the House, and we've talked, but you understand the challenge. The challenge is to see if we can find a way to move forward in a bipartisan fashion. The government of Puerto Rico and colleagues on this committee, where there are obviously differing views. Let's start with the Congressman.
As you all know, I fight for equal rights for the American citizens of Puerto Rico, equal political rights and equal treatment in federal programs. But I'll be very specific to answer your question. Something concrete you could do is to improve the treatment of Puerto Rico under both the Medicaid and the Medicare programs. And let me explain the impact that it would have. Just changing the Medicaid program as it applies to Puerto Rico so that it would cover our constituency up to 100% of federal poverty level would give Puerto Rico, the government of Puerto Rico, at least $1.5 billion more to deal with the health needs of our population. That would help Puerto Rico in terms of its liquidity issues. It would help Puerto Rico in terms of balancing its budgets, because you have to understand, when you're talking about Puerto Rico, you're not talking about Costa Rica or the Dominican Republic. You're talking about American citizens who can hop on a plane from one day to the next and move to the States if you're not treating them adequately, if they don't have a decent quality of life. So that's being concrete. The other program that you can deal with is Medicare. It is atrocious that we have the same payroll taxes in Puerto Rico, and there are disparities in the way the Medicare program applies. Hospitals do not get paid the same, medical providers do not get paid the same, and advantage plans in Puerto Rico do not get paid the same. That money, hundreds of millions of dollars, would be flowing, more than that, through our economy, and they should. And it would help the economy to grow, particularly the health sector to grow. Senator Schumer, thank you. Thank you so much for introducing both pieces of legislation. I have counterpart legislation in the House, as you know. I previously addressed the Medicaid and Medicare issue, so I will now address, for the sake of time constraints, the Chapter 9 issue. It is not panacea. I have never proposed it that way. In fact, I don't like talking about bankruptcy insofar as Puerto Rico is concerned. I do believe that our debt is payable. You might need to restructure, of course, we have to, in particular cases. One example is the Puerto Rico Code. We had it for 45 years, and then for no reasons explained in the congressional record, we were left out, the life of a territory. And since then, now that we could be using it, now that our legislative assembly could be saying the power authority should be eligible or should be eligible to go to bankruptcy court and seek to reorganize itself, we are helpless. It would assist even in the process of negotiations, because it would foster fair negotiations to have Chapter 9 as a backup. So it is a very practical thing to propose. Not that I'm proposing bankruptcy, simply that we should have the same treatment as the states do in the mainland.
You boil this down, it's a matter of right and wrong, it's a matter of fairness. All along the last decade or so, Puerto Rico has suffered economically as a result of policies of the United States government. The loss of the major military installations and the financial boost that gave to the island. The loss of some of the pharmaceutical companies because of that position expiring. And now a change in the law that's been on the books since 1984 with regard to now the crisis that we are facing. And it's simply not fair. and of course, my state of Florida has a huge, estimated 1 million Puerto Ricanos all over Florida, but a lot that are concentrated in the Orlando area. Now, I wonder if we don't solve this problem, whether it's the health care problem, Medicaid, Medicare Advantage, if we don't solve the bankruptcy problem and things just rock along like they are, how many more American citizens residing in Puerto Rico are going to move to the mainland? And you know what that means. They're coming to places like New York and Florida, which of course we're glad to have them. But what degree of expertise and educational population is going to move from the island to the mainland? That's not good for Puerto Rico. Congressman, you want to comment on that?
Very much so. You see, there's consensus here, Mr. Chairman, that the worst problem Puerto Rico is facing is lack of economic growth. And a related aspect of that is the loss of population. It's very hard, if not impossible, to grow if you're losing population. And we're losing population at the tune of about 1.5% net per year, now for more than 10 years. They're leaving, yes, to places like Florida. And why? That's the question. They leave because of lack of good quality of life. They're leaving because of lack of jobs. They're leaving because of lack of good paying jobs. And for some to suggest that we should have a lower minimum wage doesn't make sense to me. If you lower the minimum wage in Puerto Rico, you will be giving the people of Puerto Rico an additional incentive to leave. The cost of living in Puerto Rico is comparable to the one in Florida. If you lower the minimum wage in Puerto Rico, you're basically giving people an incentive to simply rely on welfare benefits. It makes no sense. We should stop treating Puerto Rico differently. We should treat Puerto Rico equally. That's a long-term plan that would make sense. And I have to react to Dr. Holt's comment about Puerto Ricans paying payroll taxes, but the Medicare program being 75% funded by general revenues. Well, let me remind the members of this committee, as well as Dr. Holtz, that close to 1/2 of U.S. households in the mainland do not owe federal income taxes. And nobody is suggesting removing them from programs like Medicare, Medicaid, and so on. The reason why, it's a policy reason why we're not paying federal income taxes, but at the same time, it is a policy reason, there is a policy reason for excluding us from a lot of federal programs. So we have to be smart about this. We have to make sure that in Puerto Rico we have a decent quality of life, and that involves health programs, that involves having, for example, participation in the Earned Income Tax Credit program, like Dr. Marswatch was suggesting, child tax credit programs, because when you look at them all, what you're doing is improving the quality of life in Puerto Rico. They are fellow American citizens. You shouldn't be looking the other way.